The Prime Minister's speech this morning about Greenland and US tariffs was incredibly disappointing. We are facing an existential crisis, arguably. A NATO ally, the largest, the United States, is threatening to annex Greenland, which is a constituent part of the Kingdom of Denmark, itself a NATO ally. The cohesion and continued credibility of NATO is threatened by this situation, and at the same time, we have war continuing to rage in Ukraine, and Russia is threatening the Baltic states. Yet what we heard from the Prime Minister this morning was a speech that amounted to nothing more than a series of justifications for doing absolutely nothing. President Trump's assertions regarding Greenland contain what might be argued to be a grain of truth and a mass of falsehoods. Claims that Denmark secures Greenland with only 2 dog sledges, or that the seas around Greenland are infested with Russian and Chinese warships, are highly misleading. In fact, they're misleading to the point of falsehood. Yes, Danish Special Forces, the Cirrus Patrol, operating in the far reaches of Greenland, do use dog sledges, but that's because in those Arctic conditions, they are the only way to sustain long-range patrols. But Denmark commits far more than that to Greenland's defences. And yes, Russia and China do have an interest in the high north, in the Arctic, but the last Chinese warship to enter Greenlandic waters did so more than a decade ago. Yet the British Prime Minister, knowing all this, has not pushed back on the misleading claims that are floating around. He's not even corrected the record for the British public, despite knowing that they're somewhat confused about this and the mixed information, and that the situation threatens NATO, a central pillar of the United Kingdom's security architecture, and indeed that of Europe as a whole. Instead, what we heard was a speech that doesn't even engage with reality. The Prime Minister told us that world politics shape the cost of your energy, the price of your food, and the security of your jobs. And that is fundamentally misleading in these particular circumstances. Yes, the war in Ukraine did drive up wholesale gas prices in 2022, but UK retail energy prices are shaped far more by his domestic policy choices than what's happening in Eastern Europe. The United Kingdom chose not to maintain long-term gas storage, and his government decided to continue to impose heavy levies on household and business energy bills. Electricity prices remain pegged to gas because of market design decisions taken over many years, including design decisions and choices made by his government. It is those choices, his choices, and those of his government, more than geopolitics, that determine what you are paying for your energy. The Prime Minister claimed his government was taking action to reduce energy bills. Well, that is a highly dubious and questionable claim. The energy price guarantee has largely expired, standing charges remain historically high, UK retail electricity prices remain amongst the highest, if not the highest, in Europe, even though wholesale prices have fallen significantly. These are all the results of his policy decisions and those of his government, and some regulatory failures. They have little to do with Greenland or Ukraine, and the Prime Minister offered no solution to them. He pointed also to frozen rail fares and prescription charges, presumably in an effort to convince you that his government is actually doing something. But rail fare freezes don't address the inefficiency of the railways. They don't address the fragmentation of the railways or the subsidy burden that they carry. Prescription charges were already politically marginal, and whilst important to some people, they're small fry compared with the immense burden that he's imposed, he and his government, on your household expenses in other respects. And neither measure addresses the pressures households are facing, and neither has any credible link to the geopolitical situation that he was supposed to be describing. The Prime Minister said that active government means controlling inflation and bringing down interest rates. But the things he mentioned, in reality, are driven primarily by Bank of England policy, global monetary conditions, and supply constraints, rather than his government's decisions. The Prime Minister, in that case, was claiming credit for things that actually he's not really responsible for. He also suggested that commitment to international law and alliances keeps prices down, jobs secure, and the economy resilient. But international law does not actually set commodity prices, stabilise supply chains, or guarantee trade flows in a crisis particularly. Presumably what he actually meant was that uncertain times and insecurity make for economic jitters. And if he had meant that, or did say that, he would have been correct. But he didn't say that. And if that's what he meant, he certainly seemed distinctly reluctant to do anything about those risks and safeguard the UK against them. And as I say, the entire speech left me with the feeling that he was actually trying to justify doing nothing. Indeed, throughout the speech, external forces were presented by the Prime Minister as the cause, the primary cause at least, of your economic difficulties, and the geopolitical situation was used to deflect his responsibility and that of his government for the policy decisions that they made and continue to make. That evasion was clearly deliberate, and it tells me three things. Firstly, it tells me that the Prime Minister does understand the impact his policies and those of his government have on you. Secondly, it tells me that he intends to avoid accountability and responsibility for them. That's the whole point of his evasion. Thirdly, it means, importantly, that he intends to carry on just as he has been. And in this morning's speech, he deliberately bundled the geopolitical situation, President Trump's tariffs, strategic security, NATO tensions, and the domestic cost of living all together in one big basket. The intention being to confuse you, to make you think that perhaps he's got a lot on his plate and that he's not doing too bad a job in the circumstances. His purpose in doing that was to evade, as I say, responsibility and accountability and to justify doing nothing new. He left the British public less certain about what is driving the problems that they face in their daily lives. He left our allies without clarity about concerning British intent, and he will have encouraged potential adversaries, perhaps in Moscow, Beijing, and even in Washington, to see the United Kingdom as timid and therefore weak. He also continues to leave the nation without direction, unprepared for the trade-offs required in what will almost certainly become a harder, more coercive and less secure world. The situation that Britain faces at the moment requires honesty. It requires leadership, vision and direction. Indeed, it requires statesman-like leadership, willing to acknowledge reality, pay attention to detail, take responsibility for policy decisions, and provide the country with the confidence and the direction it needs. Sadly, the Prime Minister's speech this morning did none of that.